Oh, it's bright. It is bright over here. Let's see if I can do something about that. Wow, it's dark. Huh? How about okay? Yeah, let's do that, folks. Hello and welcome. Thanks for swinging by another live. Trying it live as the world keeps changing on us every darn day. A lot of millennials will tell you, and before you could go a long while without hearing about the president. You would just go about your life and just, you know, think maybe download your favorite new, song on LimeWire. You could talk about that. You go to a LAN party and play some Halo, and you just didn't care. You just didn't. It wasn't so relevant. But when they start literally shutting down the government, that is gonna end up having a bit of an impact on you. One of the things you expect when you cast a ballot is that this person's going to go and show up and try and actually like keep the lights on, but that is not what we've been getting. And so, listeners, welcome back to Trad News. We have ourselves an episode that I just wanted to say, you know, let's just cast the blame. Let's just talk it out in an objective way. Historically, what happens when the government shuts down and who is to blame and how do you end a shutdown, right? So, tonight we're tackling a question that seems to come around like clockwork now in American politics because they got votes and they then, you know, have one little tactic of like, let's just not show up anymore. Let's just stop it. Let's just throw the tantrum and be done. So in this context, it's done. It already has been shut down. Um, but can we cut through the usual partisan noise and actually discuss what it means, the significance of this? Because it's not like you can't go to your post office tomorrow, or can you? I don't actually know. But yeah, when one political party though controls everything right now, House, Senate, White House, uh, who is really to blame when the government shuts down? Spoiler, they have a good reason that they may be the ones in the hot seat to lead and get it done. But how on earth do we get out of these messes? I think we should talk about how quickly this might happen and what the historical context has been. So uh, it's easy to understand gridlock when you have divided government, right? Democrats control one chamber, Republicans control another. Checks and balances. We like that. That's how our founding fathers intended it. Especially when the president is from a different party of everybody who's leading on Capitol Hill. That's when you start getting yourself compromise. And as much as I never compromise, I believe that that is probably one of the best parts of our system, so that you have someone to make sure you can't just be drunk at the wheel the whole time. So we get that compromise is hard, but what happens when one party has it all? Shouldn't they just be able to go ham and cook, right? Well, they have what we call a trifecta, right? Total control of the federal government. And that's what we're digging into tonight. Because if you can't govern when you hold all the cards, that says something important about the state of our politics as a whole, their ability to govern, and frankly, who deserves to be held accountable. So stay with me for a good half hour because that's what the algorithms tell me I have to do this for. We'll break down what a trifecta really means, who shoulders the blame, and critically, what actually could lead to the end of a standoff like this. So let's start with the basics. A political trifecta, simply put, is when one party controls the presidency, the Senate, the House of Representatives. You got alignment across the executive and legislative branches, and the president signs what Congress passes, basically. And Congress is run by the president's own party. In theory, and I want to emphasize in theory, this should make governing significantly easier. Think about it, like under divided government, you need bipartisan cooperation. You actually would want to try and make things that are popular and might be, working in everybody's districts and be the right middle ground, right? You've got to negotiate across party lines, make concessions to the opposition, build coalitions that cross the aisle. It's messy, it's slow, but at least everyone knows why things are complicated. But with a trifecta, the excuses evaporate a bit, right? You don't need the other party's votes if you can keep your own people in line. Major legislation, especially big budget bills, they should move more smoothly. These are anticipated, right? After all, you're supposedly on the same team. But the reality is this: trifectas don't guarantee smooth sailing, not even close. History is littered with examples of unified governments that still manage to stumble into shutdowns or near shutdown crises. And really, this only started under Obama when Ted Cruz took a lot of credit for just getting us all furloughed, right? So, uh, why? Why does this happen? Because political parties aren't monolithic. They're coalitions. These are big tents, theoretically, and those tents contain factions with very different priorities, very different tolerance levels for compromise. You may be a Republican in a suburban district in a major blue state. You may be holding down half of South Dakota. They have different priorities and different things that they're representing, right? So if you've got moderate Democrats, for example, from swing districts who need to appeal to independent voters, then you got the progressives pushing for ambitious social programs, major reforms, affordable housing, things people tend to like on paper and haven't seen done from their government in ever, other than maybe West Wing episodes. So those groups don't always see eye to eye on spending priorities, on how far to push, on what's politically possible versus what's politically necessary. What is necessary is passing a budget to keep the government going. So let's look at the Republican Party. They have establishment conservatives focused on traditional fiscal restraint and business interests. That's the nice way of putting it. And then you got populist insurgents demanding dramatic action on immigration, challenging international commitments, questioning long standing policy orthodoxies. Those factions clash loudly and often. So when we have a trifecta, the conflicts don't disappear. They just move inside the party. Instead of Democrats versus Republicans, it becomes moderates versus progressives or establishment versus MAGA, right? The fights become intramural rather than inter-party. And it kind of feels Bush League in how intramural it can get. So here's the kicker. Sometimes those internal fights are even harder to resolve than the cross-party negotiations because you can't just blame the other side anymore. You got to look inward. You got to say, we have the House, we have the Senate, the unknowns are known, to quote the great Donald Rumsfeld. So you're fighting with your own teammates. The whole country is watching. And so, yes, a trifecta gives a party power, but it also gives them something else: undivided responsibility. And that's where things get interesting when a shutdown looms, right? So, who deserves the blame? Let's get to the heart of the matter. When a government shutdown happens under a trifecta, I'm not. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about which party or which political ideology you prefer. I'm talking about accountability, about who the public should reasonably hold responsible when a government that's supposed to serve them stops functioning, right? So, first and most obviously, the governing party itself is responsible. This is the no excuses principle of politics. Think about it from a voter's perspective. You just gave one party control of the entire federal government. Maybe you voted for them enthusiastically. Maybe you didn't just vote for the other guys. Maybe you begrudgingly did it. Maybe you filled out the wrong ballot. Either way, you handed them the keys of the car, the presidency, the Senate, the House. That's a mandate to govern, not to play games, not to point fingers, not to run your little pet projects that you campaigned on, but to actually run the government. So, when the government shuts down, when federal workers are sent home without pay, when national parks close, when critical services grind to a halt, voters ask a very reasonable question: why did we give you all three branches of government if you can't even keep the lights on? The public's logic is simple and hard to argue with. If you have a unified control and you still can't pass a budget, that's a failure of leadership. You will always have contests with the opposing party. You will always have inter-party, uh, nuance. If you can't pass a budget, that is your problem. That is an inability to manage your caucus, to balance the competing demands within your party, to fulfill the basic functions of government. Under divided government, however large or small, both sides can credibly blame each other in this moment. They're being unreasonable, right? They won't negotiate in good faith. You can finger point each way. But under a trifecta, that defense does largely collapse. You can't blame the opposition when you don't need their votes, right? So let's get more specific because saying the party is to blame is too broad, right? Usually the real problem isn't the party as a whole, it's specific players within the majority party. So here's how that might usually play out, right? You got a budget deal that the president supports, that the leadership in Congress supports, that probably a majority of the caucus supports. Whether you agree with that or not, it might not be perfect, but it's workable and it funds the government. It represents reasonable compromises among different wings of the party. But then relatively small blocks, maybe 20 or 30 members of the House, maybe a handful of senators, decide they can't support it. They want deeper spending cuts, maybe, or they want specific policy riders attached, or they want to take a symbolic stand on some sort of ideological issue, or just try and get reelected next cycle, right? Those are the holdouts. Those are the leverage players, the people willing to shut down the government to get what they want. Now, you might think, hey, that's democracy. They're representing their constituents. They're standing on principle. And sure, maybe, here's the thing. Their constituents elected them as part of a party that won a trifecta. A trifecta comes with a responsibility to govern, not just to grandstand. You don't just get to take the photo ops with Bad Bunny or Kid Rock or whoever you choose. When a small faction holds the entire government hostage over demands that the rest of their own party can't even accept, that's not principled leadership. That's not good negotiating. That's brinkmanship. And when that fails, when nobody blinks and the government just shuts down and they don't even show up for the vote, that faction bears enormous blame. The rest of the country shouldn't have to suffer because 30 House members want to prove a point, right? But I should mention a major point that they're worried about is based on a $4 trillion deficit that a recent vote is going to crater. And the most important hangup that has become the focal point of this shutdown is your healthcare, right? That they conveniently are going to have uh, something like 20 million Americans lose their access or have a massive hike to their insurance plans because of what is being stripped away from the ACA. Also, you can give tax breaks to the rich. So there's no real way around it. There's only been sort of misdirection to supporters about they want to give everyone a free ride or something. It's going to undocument it or whatever. No, it is literally all Americans are supposed to get health care, supposed to be able to live healthy, right? We are supposed to not just let the healthcare insurance companies, continue to profit off our sickness, right? So I believe that this doesn't have to be about the political stuff. If you've ever gone to healthcare.gov to get your insurance, that insurance is going to go up if they don't do something about it because of what this GOP just passed. So there are many people within the GOP who know when the hammer drops, a lot of people in their district are going to hurt. It's not just, the Medicaid folks who are octogenarians that, if you're an invincible millennial, if you're a Gen Zer who's never had a pre-existing condition, this can in fact impact you too. And it will hit faster. And it's going to screw over a lot of us. And that is what people are fighting for. And that is why there are people within the majority party that are still not willing to go that length because they know it's going to come back to bite them on the next election once they feel the hurt. And so they've creatively found ways to not have that happen already. But that's what the opposition party is pressing, that you need to put in writers to address how we can retain people's health care, or we will not allow this to continue. And that's their tantrum, right? That's as the minority party what they're trying to accomplish, and successfully, by pressing the shutdown, because there's no other time to negotiate that, because it already did pass. They already snuck it through, and it's going to be really bad for a lot of people. It's a healthcare increase for just about everybody, and yeah. So healthcare, human right, medical system is rigged. Should not be a monstrous profit opportunity for people in insurance companies. Right? They are making us sick. They are profiting off our sickness. We need healthier people and healthier politics in America. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to open that conversation, and I welcome that if you want to sound off. Um, so that was my little tangent on where we are at right now. But I would say, in terms of how this ends, right? Like what happens when nobody caves, when both sides dig in, and we get that shutdown. I think that the leadership thought they could outmaneuver their own caucus and somehow magically pin it on the minority party, even though they don't have any levers of power. Uh, I think it all makes them look suddenly very incompetent, right? Because good leaders know when to push and when to compromise. They know the art of the deal. They know how to count the votes. They know how to build coalitions within their own party. And so when that leadership fails at that basic task, they own the shutdown. And I believe voters don't really pay that much attention to shutdowns until it directly hits them, right? They just want DC to keep working. Like I said, we should just be talking about, uh, you know, favorite albums and when Ted Lasso season 4 might finally come out. But instead, we get this every other day, some fresh hell, right? So, uh, how will voters perceive the shutdown? It's dependent on how long the shutdown lasts. And this is an uncomfortable truth for politicians, right? Voters are smarter than you think. They may not follow every procedural detail. They're not going to always be a hard D or a hard R like you have to be. And they're not going to know every amendment, every committee negotiation, but they understand the basics, right? We're smarter than that. And they understand that one party has control right now and they're supposed to deliver. They understand that with control comes responsibilities, and they understand that they're being fed the partisan spin. So, under a divided government, you can try and split the blame. You can be both siding it. You can say we're all just being stubborn. You still want the thing to keep working. And under a trifecta, that split disappears. So, poll after poll has shown that when one party controls everything, the government shuts down, voters overwhelmingly blame that party, not by a narrow margin, by a landslide, because they they wouldn't let us excuse, that doesn't work anymore because voters gave you the power specifically to avoid this chaos. So ultimately, here's the bottom line. In a trifecta shutdown, responsibility falls squarely on the ruling party and its leaders, the leaders who failed to unify their caucus, the factions who prioritize purity over governance, and strategists who looked at dumb polls and miscalculated the politics of it all. You wanted that power. You took that power. Congratulations. You now own the consequences. So, how do we end this? We talked about the blame. We talked about the solutions, maybe, or we should, because pointing fingers doesn't get federal workers their paychecks back. It doesn't reopen the Smithsonian or restart some food safety inspection so you can get that B rating, punch it up to an A. So when you're stuck in a shutdown under a trifecta, when you own a party and a whole system and it's fighting itself and the government is still closed, how do you actually get that done? I got a couple key strategies. I want to be clear. These aren't abstract theories either. Actual mechanisms that have ended the real shutdowns throughout American history. And number one, leadership intervention. Somebody with authority has to step in and draw a new line. Usually, this is the president. Sometimes it's the Speaker of the House or Senate Majority Leader, but it needs to be someone who can credibly say, this is the new deal. This is what we can all accept. And this is where we stop negotiating, right? See, one of the problems with internal party disputes is that they can spiral. Every faction thinks if they just hold out a little longer, they get more concessions. Every negotiating session produces new demands, and frankly, they're not even at the table yet. The goalposts keep moving, or people keep dealing in absolutes. So a strong leader, a real leader and negotiator and mediator cuts through that. They sit down and listen with various factions and not dictate. They figure out what the actual bottom lines are, not the wish list, the actual red lines, and they craft a proposal that enough of the caucus can live with, right? This is almost always requiring painful concessions. The hardliners don't get everything they want. Moderates have to swallow something they don't like. Nobody leaves completely happy. That's probably a good negotiation when everybody's kind of like, that fits right now, especially in DC. So this is the political reality for them the longer this goes, though. Voters punish governing parties for more chaos than for compromise, right? There's a little bit of a carrot dangled here if you can be the ones to help cut a deal, even an imperfect one. Then watch you continue infighting while the government stays closed. A president or congressional leader who can deliver that deal, who can tell their party enough is enough, let's actually be, compassionate conservatives, moderates. It's not glamorous, It doesn't make for great campaign ads, but that is leadership, that is governance. So the other part of this is the role of party whips, right? Rebuilding party unity. This is where members are responsible for counting and securing votes to make sure they actually have it to get this done. That's absolutely critical. Party whips have a tough job in these situations because they need to convince holdouts to get on board, and they have a few tools at their disposal, but it's nothing simple. So number one, it's just public persuasion, right? It's also one-on-one closed door conversations, right? It's explaining the political reality. Look, if we don't end this shutdown, we're going to lose the next election. That's usually all they care about. Is your position on this spending rider worth losing our majority? Is knocking 20 million Americans off their health care worth not having the government online? Could we just maybe help 20 million Americans continue to get the health care they need? That feels like a tall order, but yeah, let's try. So the concession there, is that sometimes holdouts need something to show their constituents. They want to be able to tout that they won it, even though it's a Pyrrhic victory, right? Maybe it's the promise of future consideration for their issue. Maybe it's a small win on an unrelated matter that they put in a little, asterisk. Maybe it's just public acknowledgement. You get to, hold one of the pens. Good whips know how to give these face-saving concessions without derailing the entire deal. And sometimes party leadership has to make clear that continued obstruction will come with consequences. Committee assignments might be reconsidered. Campaign support might dry up. Be a shame if something were to happen. Leadership positions might go to more cooperative members. So no one likes these hardball tactics, especially when a party's being hijacked by their extreme wing already. But when a small faction is holding the entire government in place, when thousands of federal workers aren't getting paid, when critical services are frozen, sometimes you need to remind people that being part of a governing party means occasionally putting the team above your individual preferences, and maybe stop being so selfish and let 20 million Americans have their health care. The goal is to get enough members in line to pass the funding bill. Not necessarily everyone. You almost never get unanimous support, but enough to clear the threshold, right? So here's something politicians understand but don't always talk about. Nothing ends a shutdown faster than angry constituents. When a shutdown drags on, real people suffer. Federal workers in Virginia with a gubernatorial race this next month, federal workers miss mortgage payments. Families can't visit national parks. They've been planning trips for months. Small businesses that contract with the government don't get paid. Research projects stall. Food inspections slow down. And when those people, your voters, start calling their reps, start showing up, start sending letters, start filing petitions, angry about the inaction, that is when the political calculus changes fast. Because here's the thing, most members of Congress care deeply about getting reelected because all they do is every 2 years ask all their friends for money and mess with your emails and your texts and throw a weird little thirst trap photo and then ask you for $5 usually yesterday because at the end of the filing deadline or whatever. I just went into dark mode. Interesting. Yeah, it's a really terrible job they have there because they then go to DC and do nothing for 2 years and then try and do it again, try and get reelected. Love Congress. So interest groups play a role here too. Federal employee unions, business associations, advocacy organizations, they all mobilize during shutdowns. They run ads, they organize protests, they make noise. The media can amplify all of this. Every day the shutdown continues, there's another story about real world impacts, the authentic problems of real people. And another interview with a furloughed worker, right? Another segment on the economic cost. All of that public pressure creates political urgency. It makes continued obstruction increasingly costly for those holdouts. It gives leadership ammunition to tell their members, we need to end this now. So voters have more power than they often realize. When they make clear that they expect their government to function, politicians eventually listen. So, continuing with this sort of idea of resolution, a stopgap solution, there's also the punt, right? Now, let's talk about that practical reality. Most shutdowns don't end with comprehensive long-term budget deals. They end up with, that's a job for future Josh, and that's a job for future Donnie, right? So, these stopgap measures are continuing resolutions, or CRs. A continuing resolution is exactly what it sounds like. Legislation that continues funding at current levels for a set period, maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months, while negotiations continue on a full budget, conversation. Is that ideal? No. These CRs are inefficient. It just keeps kicking the can down the road, and it's uncertainty for agencies that are trying to plan. But what can you really plan these days? It's not really a good time to take anything for granted. So this kick of difficult situations, decisions, the fiscal hawks hate them. Policy advocates on both sides see them as cop outs, but they get the government functioning again. They get the workers back on the job, the paychecks flowing. They take immediate crisis off the table. So to that end, we could use it. And frankly, sometimes that's what you need. Sometimes the positions are just too far apart to bridge immediately, but you can't leave the government closed while you work it out. CR is breathing room. It lets the tempers cool. It's a pause. And the key is making sure the CR actually leads to a real budget eventually, because that's otherwise a crutch, a way to avoid making hard choices. So the good governance means using them as bridges, not destinations. And with that destination, everyone needs an exit ramp. This is maybe the most important point. Shutdowns usually end when everyone can claim some kind of victory, even if it's mostly symbolic, right? Think about the politics of politics. It's factions that have publicly staked out their positions. They've gone on the TVs. They tried a TikTok. They did a weird podcast. They've sent fundraising emails to their supporters. They've told every constituent that they have to talk to that they're fighting on their principles. If the shutdown ends with them getting nothing, if they look like they just caved, they look weak. And, their political opponents might use that against them. So that's their own betrayal because they don't have self-confidence. But smart negotiators build in their exits, ways for everyone to save face. Maybe the final deal includes language commissioning, study on the issue, right? It doesn't actually change the policy, but it gives them something to point to, gives them some more time to consider it. Maybe there's a promise of future consideration, the committee holding hearings, bringing up concerns, the next session. Maybe there's small, tangible wins on an unrelated issue, as I said, a little earmark that lets them say to their constituents, yeah, you're not getting any healthcare anymore, but look at these great roads. We finally are going to have asphalt over here instead of dirt. I don't know. Are these tactics a bit cynical? Yeah, but that's how it happens. That's the turd sandwich we got over there in DC. And in the context of ending a shutdown that's hurting real people, a little political theater in exchange for an actual resolution is a reasonable trade, right? So, ending a shutdown is less about winning an argument and more about giving everyone involved a way to walk away without looking like they lost. Because politics is about perception as much as substance, as evidenced by everything you see all the time now. So, big picture, what do we take away from the moment, whether this goes another day or 50 or ruins a lot of people's Christmases? We'll find out. First lesson, trifectas don't guarantee effective governance. They give a party power, but they expose internal divisions. They eliminate the blame on the other side defense. They make a party's ability or here inability to manage itself visible for every voter to see. When you have all the power and things still fall apart, you can't hide from that. You own it. The incompetence is on full display with this trifecta. Second lesson, this blame for a trifecta in a shutdown falls squarely on the governing party, right? This is not ambiguous. This is not both sides share responsibility. This is not a partisan take. The party with unified control owns the failure to govern. This isn't about me or you and the partisan preference of the day. This is about logical accountability. If you have the tools to avoid a shutdown and it happens anyway, that's on you. Huh? Third lesson, small factions wield enormous power in these close majority situations. When you got a slim margin in the House or Senate, 20 votes can be the difference. 4 votes can be the difference between passage and failure. That gives small ideological blocks tremendous leverage. So the question for party leaders is, how do you balance respecting those members' concerns with the needs to actually govern? It's not easy, but it's literally their job. And everybody who's probably dissenting is worried about their own job the next election cycle. Fourth lesson, ending shutdowns requires pragmatism over purity. It requires leadership willing to make tough calls. It's also willing to hold the line when it's the right time. It requires members willing to accept that governance means compromise. It requires prioritizing the functioning of government over scoring political points. And it requires maybe putting the voters ahead of you and your own ego trips. And when it comes to keeping them on their health care plan, so it seems like a small little thing to keep the thing going. Um, Most importantly, it requires remembering what government is actually for. That's what I'm saying. Budgets aren't just partisan trophies. They're not just vehicles for your ideological battles. This is the mechanism through which the government serves citizens. So when you shut down the government in a fight with your own party and ineptitude, you're telling millions of Americans that your little disputes matter more than their lives. Your petty stuff more than the access to the services they depend on, like Medicare, more than the basic stability they need to plan their lives and these important agencies to plan their future too. So that's not principled leadership, that's selfishness dressed up as conviction, right? The absolute steadfast governance of incompetency, the clown car, right? The voters understand this. They might not follow every detail of the budget process, but they understand when politicians are putting politics above people. And they understand that especially at election time. So the next time you hear about a shutdown threat under a trifecta, like today, watch carefully. Watch who's willing to compromise, who's demanding purity, who's putting out that olive branch and actually coming to the table to listen, who's trying to solve problems for you, and who's just trying to make little points on the scoreboard, right? So they can have their crypto scheme work out. Because in the end, governance isn't about winning every argument. It's about keeping the government functioning for the people who depend on it. You, me, Susie Ann, Mildred, Gretchen, uh, Wandale Robinson for the New York Giants. Who knows? So there you have it, folks. Government shutdowns under unified party control. Who's to blame? How they actually get resolved. The answer to the first question was clear, right? When you have a trifecta, you own the outcome. The party with the power bears the responsibility for failure. And the answer to the second part, resolution requires strong leadership, party discipline, public pressure, practical stopgap measures, and enough political wisdom to give everyone an exit ramp, right? So here's my final thought for tonight. I finally talked long enough for the algorithm to get some people in this. So welcome, my friends. Welcome to Trad News. My final thought is none of this has to happen in the first place. Truly, right? Shutdowns aren't inevitable. They're not natural disasters or acts of God. They're choices. They're political choices made by silly people who could have chosen differently. A party with a trifecta has every tool it needs to avoid shutdowns. They have the votes, they have the procedural control, the alignment between branches. If shutdowns happen anyway, it's because leadership failed, because factions prioritize leverage over responsibility, because politicians forgot they're supposed to serve the public, not the other way around. So, next time you hear politicians trying to place the blame on the other party or each other, remember the buck stops with those in charge. It ends when we require something too rare in modern politics, putting country above party and people above politics. So, thank you for joining Jay Burst here on Trad News tonight. You've been listening to Trad News, the AM radio station on your TikToks and YouTubes. Stay informed, stay engaged, demand better from those who govern, and question everything, right? Good night. Okay, now I have to figure out how to turn these things off. I never am good at this. Okay.